Welcome to the 8-Minute Devotion with Pastor Cameron Walcott. The 8-Minute Devotion is a daily message that exists to give you hope, encouragement, and life as we look together at the Word of God. And now, the 8-Minute Devotion.
Hello and welcome back to the 8-Minute Devotion, episode 69. Of course, we've been looking at the book of Philippians, and this week we're in Philippians chapter 3. We are going to read today from verse 4 until verse 6. The Apostle Paul says this about himself: "Though I myself have reason for confidence in the flesh also. If anyone else thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness, under the law, blameless." What's happening in this passage is this. The Apostle Paul is saying, look, you must not trust in the flesh. You must not trust in your external works in order to make you righteous. You must not think that anything you did on the outside can really make you righteous in the eyes of God. You must not trust in your flesh. You must trust only in Jesus. But then he says this. He says, look, if anyone could have trusted in their flesh, it would have been me. Paul begins mentioning all the ways that he had followed the Jewish law, all the ways that he had built up his flesh in his former life in order to earn favor with God under the old covenant. He said, I have more confidence. I could have, not that I'd have, he didn't have any more, but he was saying, I could have more confidence in the flesh than any of you. He said, I was circumcised on the 8th day. In other words, perfectly fulfilled the Jewish law. I was of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin. I was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. You know, I was purebred. I was really a pure Jew. I was born into a Jewish family. I was born a Jew. I had done it. I knew the law. He said, I was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. Concerning the law, I was a Pharisee. And if you know anything about the Pharisees, you know that the Pharisees were quite active at keeping the law of God. That's why, today we use the term Pharisee in a negative sense, because the Pharisees were so much into the law of God while neglecting the more important matters, as Jesus said. But yet, at that time, before Jesus came into the earth, if you wanted to be serious about following God's law, if you wanted to be serious about following the Word of God, being a Pharisee was probably the best way for you to go, because they were the sect of Jewish believers who were absolutely sold out to the Word of God. They were the ones who were absolutely committed to following God's law. So Paul is saying, when it came to the law, I was a Pharisee. I was from the group that really knew the laws, that really kept the laws. Look, guys, I knew the law. If salvation was possible through keeping the law, if salvation was possible through the flesh, I would have found it. He then said, concerning zeal, if you want to talk about someone who is passionate about keeping the flesh, following the flesh for salvation, again, guys, that's me. I persecuted the church. He even says, concerning the righteousness which is in the law, I was blameless. All of those ceremonial laws in the old covenant, I kept them all. I kept all the Sabbaths. I kept all of the dietary laws. I kept all of those laws in Leviticus. If you want to talk about becoming righteous through keeping the external laws, through trusting in your flesh and doing what the flesh could do, Paul said, that was me. I was the one who followed all of those laws. I was the one who did all of that. If anyone could have been righteous through the flesh, it was me. I kept all of those laws. Paul had kept the law blamelessly. He had done everything right by the book his entire life. He was a Pharisee. In Acts 26, when he's giving his testimony before Agrippa, he said, I was from the straightest sect of the Pharisees. So you take the strictest group, and then you get the strictest part, the strictest sect in the strictest group. That's who I associated with. That's the group I was part of. He had done everything well. If anyone had been trained to keep the law and had applied the discipline to do so, it was him. According to the law, he was blameless. But yet, when you look into the life of the Apostle Paul, despite these facts, despite the fact that he had done so much through his flesh, he had also been a murderer before he was saved. He had been a murderer who hated Christ. He considered himself a law keeper, and he tried to kill those who were following the law giver. It was so ironic that the one who loved the law was killing the brothers and sisters and disciples of the one who gave the law. You see, his life is a stark reminder that keeping the law cannot make us holy. We can keep all the rules on the outside, but still be completely missing out on real holiness. We can devote our lives to disciplines. We can devote our lives to keeping this rule and this instruction and this habit and this discipline, and still miss out on what salvation is really about and on what Jesus really came to do in our lives. We must be very clear that keeping rules and principles alone cannot bring us holiness. I think of the story of John Wesley. John Wesley, he started the Methodist Club with his brother and a few others. Actually, before he was born again, he started this club. And they first called themselves Methodists because of the methods that they would keep. And John Wesley followed rules so carefully. When he was a young man, he wanted to please God, and he came up with all of these rules and principles that he was going to follow. He went to the mission field before he even had a conversion experience. But it was when he was on the way to the mission field, he met a group of Moravians. They spoke to him about salvation. They spoke to him about the grace of God. They spoke to him about a relationship with Jesus. And John Wesley realized that salvation, it wasn't about following a bunch of methods. It wasn't about how much Bible reading you could do. Salvation was through the grace of God, and it changed his life. John Wesley wrote in his journey that day, after he spoke to the Moravians and prayed, his heart felt strangely warmed as he realized what it meant to follow Jesus. And John Wesley's life was changed on that boat. John Wesley's life was irrevocably changed. He became a great preacher. He kept his disciplines. He kept that pursuit of holiness. He kept those high standards. But he received a power to really keep them, and that was the grace of God. He received real salvation, not through all the rules he tried to keep, but through the grace of Jesus. It's the same for all of us. Real holiness comes not through rules. It comes through the grace of God. The Apostle Paul reminded us, he had done everything to trust in the flesh. It left him as a murderer, persecuting those who followed Jesus. We must not trust in the flesh. We must trust only in the grace of God. Join us again tomorrow for our last episode this week on the 8-Minute Devotion.
Thank you for listening to the 8-Minute Devotion. We trust you've been encouraged and blessed today. Please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or by visiting the8minutedevotion.podbean.com. For questions or comments, please email us at the8minutedevotion@gmail.com or visit our Facebook page. We would love to hear from you.